about it?
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and jump into this. Where are we in terms of public acceptance and understanding that climate change is real?
We've reached kind of a turning point, especially, I would say, in the last year and a half. I think this has been coming. You could see it in the polling over the last dozen years or so. We went through a period where awareness was fairly high after Al Gore's movie 10 years ago. And then we saw a really, really strong pushback from the fossil fuel funded people who like to deny and distort the science. And that kind of dampened public awareness for a while. But what has been happening is the planet itself is really starting to send us a message. And people are getting this. And we started seeing that turning probably in 2012 when we had, you remember the very, very unusual spring here in the eastern United States.
I do.
And especially here in this area, it really impacted. And we've just had a series of really unusual and impressive extreme events. Hurricane Sandy comes to mind, the California drought, but just a steady kind of a pounding where most people, especially people say over 35 or 40, recognize that they're seeing things that they just have not seen before.
Right.
And so they're starting to listen. And scientists will tell you that you can't, it's really hard to point to a particular weather event and say this is due to climate change.
Right.
But when you are seeing things, when you have a 100-year storm and 2 weeks later you have a 500-year storm and next year you have a 1,000-year storm, people are picking up on this, that these are unusual times. And so they're saying maybe those scientists really are right about this. And in fact, just yesterday I was reading a statement from a very conservative CEO of a railroad company who just came forward and said, and these are people that they ship a lot of oil, they ship a lot of coal, so it's been their bread and butter, and it's not been in their interest to really recognize climate change. But he came out and said, from my point of view, climate is changing, and I don't think I'm going to let them fool me on this anymore.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
It's a powerful statement. And so people in particular at the high end in industry and government outside of the US Congress get it. In fact, even oil companies. In one of my recent videos, I have an interview with a gentleman who is the vice president for CO2 of Shell Oil Company. And he is very clear that you will have to look far and wide within oil company management to find anybody that denies climate science. They know it's here, they know it's going to impact them. They're trying to figure out how to get the soft landing for their industry. Obviously, that's their interest. But they recognize the science, and that's clear. So the question is, how do we drill that awareness into our legislators? And we have a problem at the federal level with the US Congress, and we have a problem at the state level with our legislature. They are out of step. They're out of step with the American public on a lot of things. I think everybody knows that. They're at least equally out of step on climate change, because majorities of people, even conservatives, even Republicans, who have traditionally been unwilling to look at this issue are now saying, yes, it's important, we need to deal with it, and the government has a role, and we need to start moving on it.
What do you think the reasons are? Well, why is the legislature behind? I mean, you said a moment ago that that CEOs, leaders in industry are recognizing this. I think there's a perception that with campaign donations, that sort of thing, that may be influencing legislators. Why is there a disconnect at that level?
Well, we've had
If those people are coming around and the public perception is that they're the ones who are influencing the legislature, what's
well,
happening?
it's not that simple because what we have in this country over the last, say, 30 or 40 years is a movement to divide us on ideological and social grounds. And we've had the rise of a kind of an alternative universe of media in terms of talk radio and Fox News and some of these other media outlets that are frankly just not fact-based. They are ideological and they have an agenda, and they have done a job of convincing their audience that they should only listen to them and that any other information that they may hear is to be disregarded. And this is, in large part, the phenomena that we see with the Donald Trump of the rise of Donald Trump and the Republican Party, because he now has a base of people who are convinced they must only listen to him, and they won't even listen to Fox News anymore because they're so far removed from reality. But this has been deliberately created. And the far ideological right, in terms of the Koch brothers, and who are deeply embedded in fossil fuels, have been a big push behind this throughout this whole time. And it's so they have a disproportionate impact on our legislature. Many of our legislators are sort of this Tea Party kind of influence, where they're socially far to the right of where the majority of people in Michigan are and where the majority of people in the country are. I think everybody recognizes this. So we have a steep hill to climb to get through to these people, because many of them they are elected in districts that are gerrymandered. The lines are drawn in such a way that they pick up all the most extreme elements from their political party instead of a real cross-section, which I think would be a more democratic way to do it. So this is a problem in many states, and some states are starting to address it because they recognize that it skews the representation, far to one end of the spectrum, that is, where it no longer is representing the people. So we've got, we've made big progress in terms of public awareness, and there is a lot of activity that is happening in industry. A number of Fortune 500 companies are making serious initiatives to address climate change because they know it's coming, and they know that it's also an opportunity. Renewable energy and the switch to renewable energy is an economic earthquake that is going to make the internet revolution look like very small beans indeed. And it's here now. It's happening now. So eventually, I think the pull of this engine of prosperity is going to move the needle in a beneficial way for climate change. But ultimately, to get things done, to make the transition as rapidly as we need to make it, I think we're going to have to put a price signal on fossil fuel burning, a price signal on carbon, so that it's clear and that there is a downside to using these kind of fuels. We're paying a price. We're paying a carbon tax, as it were, but not through our tax bills. We're paying it in our health care. We're paying it in the damages that climate change is doing to agriculture, to infrastructure. And
the cost is already there. So
the cost is already there, so it's a failure in the market. And many conservatives are picking up on this. We're hearing this from more and more conservative economists.
Yeah, even if you look at it just from a purely conservative economic point of view,
right?
It's present and it's having a big impact. And now more people are becoming aware of that.
Right, right. So the idea is there's got to be a way to price carbon so that signal that the market has not been giving us is built in there. It's, there's a study out of, for instance, the Harvard School of Public Health that they simply tallied up all the damages that, for instance, coal burning does in terms of the health of people, particularly in urban areas, particularly young people. Asthma, respiratory disease, heart disease, blood pressure, all of these things that cost huge amount of money, premature death. And if you add all of that in to the price of coal burning, then suddenly you're doubling the cost, more than doubling the cost. And
that's not even addressing the quality of life issues.
And that's
just
not
the economic
that's
element.
That's just the direct impact of the health impacts of burning fossil fuels. And so so we're seeing some states emerge as leaders in beginning to deal with this. Colorado, California, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Michigan has been kind of pulling up the rear a little bit, and so we need to change that because we've got the technology, we've got the manufacturing capability, we've got great universities, we've got proximity to markets, good transportation. We have everything we need to be a global leader in renewable energy, solar and wind manufacturing. But those companies won't come here if we don't create a welcoming, friendly climate where we're showing that yeah, we get it. We get it. This is a real deal.
Are the states that are the leaders in this, are they providing incentives for these companies, or is it just in terms of what they're accomplishing at a statewide level for energy production and that sort of thing?
Well, the primary thing is that there's different ways to do it. Some states have very aggressive renewable portfolio standards, meaning they say, in Michigan we have a renewable portfolio standard for 15% renewable energy, which we have met in the last year. But there are other states that are 20, 25, 30% or more. And they're really aggressively pushing the envelope to eventually go completely carbon free. Michigan is at a moment right now where we're rewriting our energy legislation, and the conservative elements in the legislature would like to do away with a standard or a mandate for renewable energy. And I think that's wrong. But if we can't do that, what we need to at least do is create a regulatory mechanism that recognizes, for instance, that solar energy is now on an exponential growth curve. It is wildly politically popular across the political spectrum. And soon, many of the largest customers of our utility companies will be in a position where they can decide if they want to self-generate.
They won't need that utility.
Well,
we'll need it less.
We hope that we can keep the utility because they understand how to operate our grid. And the grid gives us flexibility. The grid gives us a backup. The grid makes a lot of things possible in this new distributed energy system. But at a certain point, the other technology that's coming on is battery storage of energy. So as energy storage, which is now cost dropping on the same curve as solar has been for the last 5 or 10 years, at a certain point, history just tells us those technologies will become so cheap and so compelling that the big, large customers, say a big Walmart store with a huge flat roof and a huge parking lot, and they're running their numbers every month, and they finally hit a break point where they see if they put solar panels over their parking lot and on their roof, and they put a battery in the basement, they can just walk away from the utility.
Their costs are lower, they're dramatically lower.
And so this is what terrifies utilities. And instead of reaching out to see this as an opportunity, they're trying to pull back and maintain control of this new technology. But what they're going to find is just like, it's what the phone companies that were wedded to landlines, who failed to grasp how cell phones were going to revolutionize our communication. If they did not embrace the cell phone technology, then they disappeared. So 25 years ago, there were 5 so-called baby bells, major landline phone companies. I think 2 or 3 of them are no longer with us. The ones that really embraced cell phone technology, I think AT&T comes to mind, those are the ones that survived. And so renewable distributed energy is following a curve very similar to what we've seen with cell phones, what we've seen with digital photography, a number of other technologies, personal computers.
So what I'm hearing you say is the smart utility company would see this coming, would embrace it, get behind it, and have that be part of their model for energy generation, and not sticking with the traditional fossil-based generation methods or other generation methods.
Yeah, it's not really a matter of, at a certain point it's not going to be a matter of choice for them, because the technology is simply going to do what it wants to do. And this is where the danger lies, because the last thing Michigan needs is for some more of its flagship corporations to be circling the drain.
Michigan's been hit pretty hard.
Michigan's been hit hard, and in the past, that's happened because in the case of the auto companies, they were slow to recognize the competition they were getting, to recognize changing markets and changing technology, and so they have fallen behind. That's going to happen to our utility companies too. Not too far down the road, there's going to be 2 kinds of states. There will be the states that produce renewable energy and the states that buy renewable energy. Michigan has a huge resource, both in solar and in wind, and huge capabilities in terms of being leading manufacturing center for those technologies. So I think we should be out in front of this, not falling behind.
Speaking of the economic aspect of this, there's you've talked about the financial incentives for doing this, the opportunities that are coming up. We're also seeing things right now about the Exxon New and the fossil fuel divestment movement that are having an impact on this. Can you talk a little bit about those issues?
Well, you mentioned Exxon, and that's one of the most underreported stories of the last year, is that a trove of documents has been uncovered by a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation group inside Climate News. And they show that in the late 70s and early 1980s, ExxonMobil, the oil company, had an independent research team that was devoted to studying climate change and what the impact was going to be. And we can see very clearly from the documents that they were on precisely a parallel path with with NASA, with NOAA, with the Department of Energy, with our leading universities and scientists. They understood that adding heat-trapping gases from fossil fuel burning to the atmosphere was going to trap more heat, that the planet's climate would eventually change, and this was going to lead to extreme weather, to sea level rise, to agricultural impacts, even catastrophic impacts, which is a word that they use in their literature over and over and over again.
This is Exxon.
This is Exxon.
Exxon scientists.
This is Exxon scientists. And they actually had a very credible research program right up into the 1980s, because there were people inside the company who were actually environmentalists. I mean, they saw this as an impact that the company was going to have to deal with, that government was eventually going to regulate, and they wanted to get out ahead of the issue so they could have a seat at the table when regulations inevitably came. But at some point in the 1990s, leadership decided that they were more committed to the short-term bottom line.
Exxon leadership.
Exxon leadership. And they began to ignore the issue. They began to actively distort the issue in these paid editorials that they would buy in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I can remember reading them back during that era. And in funding a number of independent organizations, think tanks like the American Enterprise Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heartland Institute, whose job it was to deliberately distort and obfuscate the science on climate change. And the model that they followed was precisely the model that was used by the tobacco industry to confuse people and delay government regulation of tobacco for 40 years.
Make it sound like it was there were lingering questions when in reality the majority of doctors in that case,
sure,
researchers, scientists, and the same with climate change, agreed that this is the most likely explanation, that this is real.
Sure, and the model is you find somebody who's out of step, you know, and you can, I don't know if you can anymore, but 25 years ago you could still find a physician somewhere who said, well, maybe tobacco's not all that bad for you. We're not really sure exactly how it causes cancer. There's a little bit of a doubt here. And so their working motto was, our doubt is our product. And as long as we can create doubt, we can hold off those regulatory mechanisms for as long as possible. And when you're making millions and billions of dollars every month, you know, every year that you can hold off regulation has a huge short-term reward for you, even though it's costing
financial reward.
Right, even though it's costing people their lives and their health. So we saw the same model essentially adopted by the fossil fuel industry. They have begun to come forward in the last 5 or 6 years. I believe all of the major oil companies will now tell you, we get it. Climate change is real. They, in fact, have a position, at least a public position, which is that there should be a price on carbon, either a carbon tax or a cap and trade arrangement. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's not clear that they are matching their rhetoric in terms of the actual lobbying and donating impact that they have on the political system, on the candidates.
The fossil fuel industry, you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, is whether the fossil fuel industry is, you know, they're admitting the science is clear, because it's really not, you can't get respect in the scientific community if you deny it anymore, because it's clear, it's so clear that you'll mark yourself as just not a serious person if you deny it anymore. But I am wondering if they are matching that scientific recognition with a political push that really needs to happen to get this change.
Are they in a position, I mean, even if, again, from purely economic reasons, if they were interested in surviving as a company, they could embrace emerging non-fossil fuels as an industry. They have the resources, industrial resources, the technical resources to do that. Perhaps it doesn't look as lucrative to them, or there's just the inertia. It's hard to speculate exactly why they're not making that move.
It's a problem, and I think in part the problem is that all of these companies have a value. Wall Street assigns a value to a company like Exxon or Shell, and that value is based in large part on untapped resources that these companies either have rights to or own outright or have options on one way or another.
What's in the ground? What's
in the ground. So oil, oil shale, coal, tar sands, whatever it might be, this fossil fuel that's still in the ground has an assigned value by Wall Street. But the science says we can't burn that stuff. We can burn only a fraction of that.
Without ruining the planet.
Without ruining the planet. So they are in a position where they will either have to walk away from or be hogtied and pulled away from these resources that they have, because we simply cannot afford them as a planet, as a society.
So I see several things happening. There's the divestment movement happening right now, divesting in fossil-based fuel, and it really started out for reasons economic reasons, ecological reasons, but it's becoming apparent that there are also strong economic reasons for doing it, for the very reason that you just talked about. Add into that the new opportunities that are emerging, the lower costs for solar, for wind, and now those fossil fuels look even less valuable. So it does seem that the fossil fuel industry is at risk of, taking a nosedive in value from several different fronts.
We're seeing the coal industry go through an enormous shakeout in the last 3 years or so. We've had a number of big coal companies go bankrupt, and among the surviving ones, profits are way, 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 way down. Even Peabody Coal's, almost a household word, is looking like it's in danger of bankruptcy right now. Because no utility in its right mind in the United States is going to build a coal plant. And we can say with great confidence that the coal industry for electrical generation is essentially dead in the United States going forward. We have a legacy of existing coal plants, and there's a recognition that they're going to be shut down. We need to shut them down. But nobody's going to be building new coal-fired power plants going forward. Many of these companies had hopes that they would be able to rely on a strong export market for markets like China, for instance. But China has now had a dawning recognition that climate change is a real issue, and that their pollution problems are so bad, both water and air pollution problems, that it's actually a cause of political instability inside the country. You see 8-year-olds getting lung cancer in Beijing. Wow. You see literally tens of thousands of people coming out to demonstrate against new power generation facilities that people fear will add to the pollution. And you see, maybe more important than anything else, China is up against a water shortage, and fossil fuel burning is one of the very, very biggest, most demanding technologies for fresh water, both in the mining and the processing and cooling for power plants when it's burned. And they simply don't have it. And they're up against some very, very hard physical barriers that bring into question, will they have enough clean water for basic human consumption a decade or two from now. So they're starting to close coal-fired power plants. They still have a number of plants that are on the books that are permitted to be constructed, but there is a very active movement within the hierarchy in Beijing, many of whom are technically, scientifically trained. They understand the issue, and they are very much trying to shut down the coal industry. In fact, the recent agreement between the United States and China made an assumption that China would peak in its fossil fuel burning and its greenhouse gas emissions sometime around 2030. But they're moving so fast that that peak may have already happened here in 2016.
And that message doesn't seem to be getting through to the American public. I think there's a widespread perception that, well, what difference would it even make if we do these things here, because China and India are going to burn so much carbon that you know, it'd be a drop in the bucket. But these changes are happening so fast. It does seem that they recognize the risk of political upheaval, social upheaval, if they don't address these things. People seem to get very upset when they can't breathe, or they don't have water to drink.
Yeah.
So it's sort of good news. I mean, it's another thing that's driving these changes.
Well, you know, one thing about China is the political class there is of a generation that remembers that if you get a political upheaval in China, you don't just go retire to golf in Malibu. You retire to a work farm in Mongolia.
I hadn't thought of that.
Quite often. So it's a very, very real, very, very serious consequence that some of these guys are looking at.
They'll be held accountable.
They could very well be held accountable in some pretty severe ways. So we're seeing rapid change in China. And the other piece of that is China knows that they missed the last industrial revolution. This is a nation of very smart, very motivated, very proud people with a great heritage. They missed the last industrial revolution, and they feel that very acutely. They have determined they're not going to miss this revolution, and the revolution that we're in right now is renewable energy. So all you have to do is ask yourself, I'm sure the question that they've asked themselves, who's going to rule economically in the coming century? Will it be people that are still tied to 19th century energy sources? Or will it be people who have liberated their economy to run on energy that is free, sun and wind and in limitless supply? I don't think you have to think too hard about that. We're looking at a revolution. The technology is there. It requires only the political motivation, the political will to go to that place. And China gets it, Germany gets it, Denmark gets it, Scotland, a number of other leading industrial countries are getting it. And we're starting to get it in the United States, but not nearly fast enough. So we need to let our representatives know this.
Even if we solved even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, there's going to be a lingering impact from what's already there. So what in Michigan, person living in Michigan has their family here, what kind of slow changes can they expect, even if things stop today, or if they continued on the path they're on of increasing CO2? What kind of slow changes could they expect to see over what period of time, and what fast punctuated changes might a family expect to see? And come back to maybe what's the impact going to be on their quality of life and even their economic life?
Well, Michigan is, for instance, we're not on the coast of the ocean, so we don't have to worry about sea level rise here. And that's going to be a huge impact through much of the world. And many people might be misled to think that therefore we're insulated from some of the worst impacts, but that's not really the case. Basic physics tells us that a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. And so when there's more moisture up in the atmosphere, there's more fuel for storms, for instance. And so what we can see, this is one of the clearest things, one of the clearest data observations that we've seen over the last 50 years, is that we're seeing more severe precipitation storm events in the upper Midwest. In fact, we're one of the parts of the country where this is changing the most rapidly. And what that means is when more and more precipitation comes in the form of extreme storms, like not just a half of an inch of rain, but 3 inches of rain, 4 inches of rain, big storm events, that does not tend to nourish and moisten the soil as much as those slow, steady rains that we're used to in the past. It tends to run off in big gully washers, and it tends to carry a lot of soil with it, as well as pollutants and pesticides and things like that. So that it degrades our soil. It impacts our water systems. Our water systems, storm systems, are being overwhelmed by these big storm events, like, for instance, the huge rain event that shut down southeast Michigan a year or so ago. Or like the very dramatic storm that came through right here in Traverse City area in August of 2015. That was something a lot of people around the state were talking about, and inevitably all of the descriptions started with, "I've never seen anything like," and you're going to hear that phrase a lot.
People who are 60 years old, 70 years old,
Yes.
80 years old.
Never saw anything like
anything
that.
like it.
Right. And so that's what the scientists are saying. There's more moisture in the air, there's more heat in the air. That's more fuel for these extreme storms. So over time, this is going to impact soils in the upper Midwest, and the breadbasket of the United States, really. Is going to have a drying effect overall on soils. We're seeing the snow is going away earlier in the spring, which means you don't have that nice, cool, wet blanket of snow lingering through into March, and some places even into April. That's pulling back, and those soils are going to be drying out sooner in the summer. So going into June and July, those soils are going to be much drier than they were 50 years ago. So that's going to impact agriculture.
Less moisture sticking in, less topsoil to hold it in place.
Right.
Earlier exposure in the season to sunlight and dry air.
And more extreme storms, and for instance, with generally warmer temperatures in the Great Lakes, we're seeing invasive species, especially at this point, especially in the lower Great Lakes like Lake Erie, but it's been seen in some of the other lakes like Lake Michigan. We're seeing organisms, algae-type organisms that are toxic. They produce neurotoxins.
Wow.
And you're seeing more and more of these algae blooms in places like Lake Erie, where a couple of years ago we had to shut down the water supply for 400,000 people in Toledo because of the presence of these toxic algae had reached a critical level in their water supply. Well, unless we change, that's going to keep happening, and it's going to keep getting worse.
And perhaps moving further north.
And perhaps moving further north. This is my fear, because I've lived in the Great Lakes region all my life, and the northern Great Lakes are my Grand Canyon. You know, it's my Yosemite. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But they are under threat. And also, as the western part of the United States gets drier, we're going to see more and more efforts for some of those states, which are becoming increasingly politically powerful, to draw water away from the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And in some respects, states like Michigan have been, our population's not been growing as rapidly. We've been losing political power. We're going to have less leverage going forward to protect those waters. So that's another big concern that I have, that I think a lot of people would share. So there are a number of impacts that are here today in Michigan. Just ask anybody that owns a ski resort, for instance. It's not what it used to be. It's not what it used to be. And ask anybody that grows cherries or apples or grapes. Some of those crops have been severely impacted by erratic weather events that we've seen just in the last few years. 2012 comes to mind. But that's a huge industry here in northern Michigan, and that could be severely impacted, if not wiped out, if we have several years in a row or a bad decade or two of weather events where those crops are getting whiplashed by extremely warm springs that bring the blossom out, and then the freeze returns and it kills the whole crop.
Or violent storms that
or
physically
violent
damage
storms
them.
that physically just tear the trees down. So we are vulnerable. In many ways, Michigan, because of our water resources, if we can protect them, we're in a good place to ride this out, at least for the next few decades. But we are vulnerable, and our political leaders are woefully misinformed on this. But the other potentially positive development is just that so many of our industrial leaders, our high-tech companies, people that are scientifically literate in the corporate world do get it. And they're starting to ask for, even demand, that renewable energy be made available. For instance, I was speaking last night about a company called Switch, which is in the process of building a $5 billion data center in Grand Rapids area. And in their search for locations, when they came to Michigan, they said, first of all, this is a data center that uses a lot of energy. Do you have the energy? And second of all, can you get us 100% renewable energy? That's what we want to use, because we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And they were able to negotiate a deal with the utilities to source 100% renewable energy, primarily wind. And so therefore they were willing to come with their $5 billion facility. This is true of more and more Fortune 500 companies, is that they're looking at this as a part of their bottom line assessment when they cite new facilities. They're looking at states that are friendly to renewable energy, that they know are on the cutting edge and that they know aren't going to be negatively impacted as the renewable revolution really takes hold. So they want to be part of the future. They don't want to be part of the past. Another example I could make is right where I live in Midland, Dow Chemical Company has made a very, very firm commitment to recognizing climate change and recognizing their role in it. And so they have secured an enormous purchase of wind power down for one of their Texas facilities, Freeport, Texas, which is the largest chemical facility of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, will be entirely powered by wind power down in Texas. And they're doing it because, not only because it's environmentally sound, but because it is the best economic solution for them and the most reliable and cheapest energy source they can find, and they can sign a contract for 25 years, and they know that the price 25 years from now will be exactly the same as it is today. So for planning purposes, that is the gold standard as far as any company economist would like to see. They don't have to worry about fluctuations in the price of oil or gas or coal or anything else. It's flat as far out as you can see. So this is a huge advantage. It's going to give them a competitive edge in the market, and they recognize that.
We seem to be at a turning point with this. There have been so many predictions about being at that knee of the curve where it moves, and there's a lot of ways that can happen. It can be a knee in the curve to catastrophe, but it could also be a knee in a curve to improvement in things. And we're right at the edge. We're right at this transition point where it could kind of go either way. It sounds kind of hopeful now. I saw the essay that Al Gore wrote in, I think it was 2014. In fact, he called it A Turning Point, New Hope for Climate. And he went from pessimist to optimist for many of the same reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think there has to be a clear-headed recognition that we're headed for some climate impacts that we can no longer avoid. Regardless, no matter what we do at this point. We've waited too long. But the technology is telling us that we're at what some people call the solar singularity. In other words, the uptake of solar and renewable technology has reached such a rapid pace that many of the predictions that were made just a few years ago will simply no longer apply. And we'd better get ready for that. And again, another comparison I like to make is 1993. If you were watching the news, you might have heard about this thing called the internet. And maybe if you were an early adopter, you had a personal computer, but by far most people did not, nor could they see the reason for it. 3-4 years later, we were all online 4 hours a night checking our email and working on our homepage.
That's right.
Because the technology simply reached a point where it was so compelling that you literally had to get on board if you were going to be part of the society, if you're going to be competitive. So renewable energy is now at that point. We are in that moment right now.
It's very encouraging. Before we wrap up here, if you will, I'd like to hear a little bit about a couple of projects. One is your Dark Snow project, and the other is the Yale Project for Climate Change Communication.
Sure.
You're very involved in both of those.
Right. I do a monthly video for something called Yale Climate Connections, which is an initiative out of the Yale School of Forestry. It is funded in part by the Grantham Foundation, and it is based on getting better climate communication. And my role is talking to scientists who are at the cutting edge, pressing them to tell me in layman's terms what it is that their work means, and then using as best I can my skills as a communicator to get that out to thought leaders. Our audience includes leading journalists, academics, activists, political people. Capitol Hill staffers are a big part of our audience. And so the videos have a big impact among the thought leader group in the population. And then secondly, I am part of something called the Dark Snow Project. You can check us out at darksnow.org or darksnowproject.org. And this is a crowd-funded initiative that we started in 2013. Myself and Dr. Jason Box, who's one of the world's leading glaciologists. He wanted to do an experiment to see if we could do legitimate science in an extreme environment like Greenland, the Greenland ice sheet, and make communication vehicles, primarily videos, that are accessible to a large number of people, so they can understand the science, they can understand what the scientists are doing and saying. So we've been to Greenland 3 times now.
Wow.
The first 2 years we were entirely crowdfunded. Last year we were fortunate enough to get a grant from Leonardo DiCaprio through his foundation. And this year I'm fundraising again for some upcoming projects. It won't be in Greenland. It will be related to sea level. I can't talk too much about it now because it hasn't been all laid out. But I hope that it's going to be a high visibility project and raise a lot of awareness, especially in terms of sea level rise, which is sort of it's the complementary issue to the melt of the ice caps, because those ice caps are melting and they're causing the sea level rise. And I think I'm going to be traveling to some places in the world that are sort of key canaries in the coal mine for the impacts of sea level rise. So darksnow.org, you can make a tax-free donation to that effort, especially if you earmark it for Peter Sinclair 2016, then it'll go directly to this work that I'm going to be doing this summer.
What's your YouTube channel? You've got these this video blog. In fact, you're called the world's sharpest climate denial debunker on YouTube. What's your YouTube channel?
Yeah, the YouTube channel is climatecrocs.com. And that comes from, it was originally started around my series of videos, which were called Climate Denial Crock of the Week. And so I have literally hundreds of videos that are available there, many of them dissecting what I call the climate crocs, which are these crunchy little nuggets of disinformation that Rush Limbaugh can say in 10 seconds, but it takes a scientist an hour to completely unpack. And so I've been applying my skills in communication
to explain
why it's a crock.
Yeah.
And why you shouldn't be fooled. And those have been very, very popular among scientists and science literate people. And I'm still continuing to produce as many of those as I can, along with the Yale series. The Yale series is called This Is Not Cool, which is tends to be also very heavily science-based, and I hope accessible as well.
I think it's both. I've seen them. They're really well produced. They're amazingly informative. They're from the number of credible people that you connect with and get this, straight from them. And these are people who have dedicated their lives to understanding the science. They're not attached to a particular point of view. They keep pressing for learning more and learning the truth. And we'll put it on the screen here at the end of the show again.
Good.
But they're fantastically informative.
I hope what comes across is that these videos are not my opinions. These videos are the result of seeking out and talking to the people who are recognized by their peers as being leaders in their field and who have 20, 30 or more years experience specializing in some of these critical areas like glaciology and oceanography. And I, to the best of my ability, I let them talk. I let them guide the conversation. I ask a few questions and then just sort of turn them loose. And so if you watch these videos, you're going to be in on the conversation that leading scientists are having. And it's going to be, I make sure that they use the kind of language that ordinary people, non-scientists, can understand. And I think that comes through.
I do too. Well, it's great. Thank you so much for talking with us and sharing your perspective on these things. It's so broad and it's so deep, and you can express it so well.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me in.